going to turn it over to you, Jenny. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene. So a big thanks to Karina and Anne who put together these slides for me and are, you know, always my go-to people. Hopefully they will speak up today if I don't get all of the details that they're hoping that I hit on. And I also am hoping that those facilities that actually adopted the option 2 this last permit, if they're on, we're going to have a chance for you all to speak up also, and I hope that you will. I think that it probably other MS4s will learn more from you than they will from me. So hopefully we'll have some good conversation when we get to that point of the presentation. So just going to kick it off and start by saying that in our 2016 MS4 general permit, we talked about MS4 monitoring programs as being intended to provide data that helps identify pollutant sources and assist in determining the effectiveness of the program. That's really important. So I'm going to say that again. Our whole idea is that the monitoring programs help provide data that identify the pollutant sources and then help you effectively run your program. So if the data that you're getting from your monitoring isn't giving you that kind of information, then we don't feel like it's as effective as it needs to be. So that was a whole reason why we went towards giving the option 2 for monitoring in the last permit cycle. Because we were hearing from some facilities, some MS4s, that they just weren't getting the information they needed from our previous monitoring requirements. It was not giving them the details that they needed to be able to effectively run their program. So that's our hope, is that you will be able to take advantage of option 2 if what you're doing with option 1 isn't working for you. So as a reminder, option 1 is basically the monitoring requirements that we had in the previous permit that we just rolled into our option 1 for the 2016 permit. And it basically required these parameters here: nutrients, pathogens, siltation, along with biological stream sampling and habitat assessments. It specified that if you had stream segments that were unavailable for parameters for pathogens, that you had to do a certain requirement of 5 samples within a 30-day period in those unavailable stream segments. But something that was really important is that, especially for those that were your larger areas, a lot of large ag areas, at least 1 sample per stream segment must be collected. So with all of the segments within the MS4 jurisdiction sampled in a 5-year period. And so we know that for some folks that was actually helpful, but for some MS4s, that information didn't really give them the detail that they needed to make decisions. So as I said, that was why we came up with option 2. The idea was that an MS4 would basically set goals for what they were trying to establish. What were they trying to, in this 5-year period, what were they wanting to really get a handle on so that they could take their program, that next step. And so we know that that's going to look different for every MS4. Some MS4s might want to do a broad area and focus on 1 parameter. Some MS4s might want to focus on a smaller area, but do multiple parameters. And so we knew, again, that it would look different for every MS4. So we were trying to provide flexibility for MS4s to be able to look at their site-specific needs and then develop a monitoring plan based on those needs. And so listed here, and I'm not gonna read it out to you, but that was the gist of what we were trying to do here with option 2, was to provide enough flexibility to allow MS4s, again, to determine what information you needed to make better decisions for your program. So our early adopters, back when the 2016 program came out, we had, it looks like 10 of them here if you count Sevier County with the co-permittees as one. There were 10 different option twos that were submitted to us and that were implemented during this last permit cycle. Excuse me. So some of our staff sat down with those MS4s and talked to them about what were the lessons learned that they could share with us from this last cycle when they were doing it. And so these were some of those lessons learned that we gleaned from those conversations. Some of them said that the cost for benthics shifted to comprehensive E. coli monitoring so that they could do E. coli monitoring in areas that they hadn't done before. Targeted monitoring allowed for impairments for the pollutant sources to be eliminated, and we actually had one facility that was able to get some stream segments delisted based on using option 2 this last round. Results were helpful to influence community leadership. I think that's fantastic that they were able to write their monitoring plan in a way that they could tell a story that would resonate with their leaders, so that gives more buy-in from leadership to your program as a whole when they understand what you're trying to accomplish. I know we had at least one or more, possibly more, MS4s that found visual stream assessments to be incredibly helpful. And that's not just going to the outfall and doing the just upstream and downstream of the outfall, but also looking at large stretches of stream segments to be able to do those visual assessments. And so we'll talk here in a little bit more about, I believe it was Shelby County that was able to have some pretty good results from the visual stream assessments there. Other lessons learned that we got were that MS4s were able to collect data to identify if the MS4 was the actual source versus others that were in the area, and if they had the ability to make any changes. Staff learned details that were specific for their outfalls and their stream systems. I mentioned earlier that county MS4s, ones that have quite a bit of ag in their area, were really appreciative of this option 2 because it allowed them to really focus their monitoring where they had urban stormwater issues and not necessarily stretch it across all of the agricultural areas. And MS4s were able to fund other areas of their program. So our intentions are not that somebody would take option 2 just so that they can reduce the amount of money they're spending on their monitoring. That's not our intention. But if you're able to show us that your goal for your monitoring makes sense and the amount of monitoring that you're doing in that area does end up being less than what you would have spent, then we feel that it's reasonable to spend that money somewhere else, either implementing BMPs that you determine are important based on that monitoring, or in other areas of your program where you're going to see some real results. So again, the idea is not just to take option 2 so that you can reduce your monitoring cost, but if that happens, then we would like to see you reinvest that money into other parts of your program. Okay, so I think I have four different systems here that we have slides for to share, that we have pictures that we could share. So Shelby County, I was told, focused on visual stream assessments. And as you can see in this picture, my understanding right here is that this pole is 8 feet tall, and that this is a manure pile that was, I believe, next to a horse farm. And so they felt that the visual assessment that they were doing of the streams found the problem fairly quickly, and were able to address that. And they felt, again, that not just this one instance, but that there were multiple instances where doing these visual stream assessments helped them find these sources. So is Chris Mason on the line?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Anybody else from Shelby County that would want to weigh in on this?
Not sure there's anyone, there's not a whole lot of West folks on here today.
Okay, Karina, Anne, did y'all have anything else to add on this one?
No, but Chris was always making a point that it's great if you go collect a sample for pathogens and get a number 2 numerous to count. But finding a pile of manure probably gets you the same information. So he's a big fan of visual assessments, that's for sure.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Karina. So Sevier County, they were able to focus on pathogens during this last permit cycle and found problems that were due to septic tank issues, which they turned over to TDEC, and other sewer issues that they turned over to the local utilities. I understand that with all of the work that they did, that after 2 years of the E. coli sampling and the fixes that occurred during that time frame, they gave us at TDEC information that allowed us to delist some stream segments. And so that's really exciting for us. I would also think or hope that Sevier County and your partners there were as excited as we were. David, did you want to add anything?
Karina, what we found doing the, I'm sorry, Jenny, what we found doing this was that we also found that by finding problems that nobody knew, we did a lot on your TDEC map. You have red streams, obviously on your TDEC map, you have blue streams and you have gray streams. Mm-hmm. We had red streams that had a lot of gray feeders. We went into those gray or unassessed streams and did a lot of sample work to try to find other sources that weren't necessarily on anybody's radar. So we expanded out into the watersheds tremendously, and that helped us. What we also found was that it also brought us to the place of having to make new friends with our local environmental health and with our city sewer systems, to the point where we've even agreed when the sanitary sewer people are going in and working on repairs and upgrades that we'll do their sampling so that we can show the lift in the streams and make partnerships out of it. So it's multifaceted. That's
wonderful. Thank you. And actually, you can call me Karina anytime. I find that an incredible honor to have anybody call me Karina. So yeah, but thank you, David, for sharing that. I think those partnerships are huge. Not all of the issues that we find in the watersheds are going to belong to MS4s. But so the more that you are in partnership and in communication with those others, the easier it's going to be for us all to find lift and water quality improvements. So that's wonderful. All right, Lakeland. Lakeland met with the field office initially to get some ideas on how to set up the plan and coordinated with them as they were working through that entire process. They used GIS to determine hydrology, where there was stagnant or no water, and it wasn't really worth sampling. And the lesson learned that we heard the most from Lakeland was that they suggested doing reconnaissance on the stations before finalizing the plan, because evidently they finalized the plan and then went out and determined that some of those places were not ideal and not going to work as they thought that they were going to. By chance, is Emily or anybody else from Lakeland on?
No, they are not.
Oh, darn.
Mm-hmm.
We do have Crystal Warren online, I think, and I did want to give her a shout out there, how helpful it was to have somebody in the field office to work with the local MS4s and help through developing the plan and help with questions. So Crystal, thank you very much.
Agreed. Karina, was there anything else to add to Lakeland?
I do want to say that it reflects other lessons as well, not just from Lakeland, but Lakeland put it nicely in words, but that they speak for a couple others like Bartlett and other MS4s in that region.
About working with the field office and doing reconnaissance
Yes.
before you go out? Okay.
Yes, and helping to develop the plan.
Okay, Williamson County was very clear to express appreciation for the flexibility that option 2 allowed. Their county covers approximately 500 square miles, majority of it being ag. And so they were able to really focus their monitoring plan on areas where the MS4 could have some impact. And again, focus that money in an area where they could see improvements. So anybody from Williamson County?
I don't believe so. I didn't see Michael Scott on here.
All right. Karina, did you or Ann have anything else to add about Williamson counties?
You pretty much captured it, Jenny.
Okay.
They did make mention that a lot of the impacts were due to the riparian alteration on private property. And through our discussion of lessons learned, there was a lot of examples of maybe going forward, maybe exploring ideas of how maybe to address that. So it was very valuable information for us as it relates to the riparian alteration. But
okay, no,
okay.
That sounds great. Thank you, Ann, for adding that. So a part of permit reporting, in our 2016 permit, we required that the monitoring plan be included in the stormwater management program, and that results of any analytical monitoring or any non-analytical activities be submitted in the annual report. We have down here our MyTDIC forms that we're working on, in hopes that that will be something we can add next time around, that the MyTDIC forms will be used to submit information. But we are open to suggestions, especially those of you that implemented option 2 last time around. As you know, is there a better way to submit data, or what do you think would be the most effective and efficient way for you to share that information? So we are open to suggestions as we are looking to write the next phase 2 permit.
Jenny, if I could, on the data submission for that.
Yeah.
What we ran into when we were getting ready to send in data to delist those streams, to take it from Nashville to EPA, we found that the StoreIt software, the database, was obviously quite extensive, and it came with a very steep learning curve. Now, I don't know if there's a way internally to maybe dumb that down so it's a little more usable, user-friendly Excel sheet, or if it's just maybe a StoreIt training class. But that spreadsheet's intimidating. We worked with Linda Wright, and Linda was more than patient. She earned her wings dealing with me on that. And so that'd be my only comment on data.
Okay. And we are trying to come up with better ways for easier ways for data to be submitted to us, but I think that is a really good point. The data that we flow to EPA, and I am not as familiar with all of the rules and regulations that apply to the data and how we flow it to EPA, but that is something we have to take into account. But at the same time, we want your data. Again, the data that you were able to provide helped us delist some streams, and so we really would love to have that in hand for us to use as well. So, but we'll keep that in mind, David, and I appreciate that comment. So, excuse me. In summary, for some of the lessons learned that we were hearing, the plan development, we at DWR provided feedback throughout the entire plan process. The idea is not that you have to come up with the perfect plan and submit it to us, but the idea is that there's some dialogue and that we really mostly want to understand that you're able to articulate to us what your goal is. What is it you're trying to find? And then what do you plan to do with that data? You know, are you focusing on pathogens in a particular area? Are you looking at nutrients and sediment together in a particular area? Are you going to look at your entire system for just one parameter? I mean, just trying to understand what your goals are and how that monitoring supports that goal is what we're trying to understand in the plan's development phase of this. And so we definitely see the option 2 monitoring as adaptive. We think that it's an iterative approach. So whatever you do for this 5-year permit, we hope you learn something from it. It might not give you exactly what you hoped it would, and so maybe you tweak it for the next 5-year permit. Or maybe it does give you that information, but you need 2 permit cycles to be able to deal with all of the issues that you find from the monitoring in that first permit. But then we would like to see it evolve. If you're able to deal with the issues that you find after 1 or 2 permit cycles, then you would move on. And whether it's making the monitoring plan stronger or changing it completely to a different area of your system. So again, there's opportunities for it to evolve and to grow. It is absolutely an adaptive approach. So sorry, going back here to plan development, collaborative approach, stakeholder involvement, may be beneficial in same jurisdictions for goal plan development. We think that is absolutely true. We've heard from a few facilities that would really like to have their community and their stakeholders be involved in determining what's of importance to the community and then develop their monitoring plan based on feedback that they get from their community. We think that's a great idea. And so, and again, now's a great time as we are working on the next phase 2 permit. Start reaching out to your community and finding out what areas, talk to your leaderships, find out what areas they have concerns in, and you know, putting those stakeholder groups together so that you're ready when it's time to start designing your plan and submitting it. Then you'll have that stakeholder input already. Again, one of the lessons learned that we heard was about reconnaissance on the sampling locations before you finalize the plan. That's always helpful. Source tracking helps with the source elimination. Can also help with determining who the responsible party might be, because it's not always the MS4, and we understand that too. Sometimes the monitoring just helps to protect yourself, to show that it's not a stormwater source. And then collaboration with TDEC, the delisting that we've mentioned before, and then just making sure that you have access to our data on our data viewer is another area where we're really trying to make sure that we have as much of our data easily available. So from our data viewer, we're hoping that folks will be able to look and see what is already there that we've taken samples of. You can use that in conjunction with your own samples to help determine where you have gaps and where you might want to do more monitoring. So I'm going to take a slight detour here, Charlene. I think we have enough time if y'all are okay with this, and give a real quick update on the rules, and then kind of talk about how the timeline for the rules and the permit, so folks kind of understand, as we're talking about the next permit cycle for option 2. Is that all right, Charlene? Time-wise?
Oh yes, we have time.
Okay.
Yep, one at a time. Sorry. Had to unmute. I forget about that.
So for just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we were able to take our rules before the board in April. It was a long time coming. We've been trying to do that for quite a while, and we were successful. The board approved all 3 rules that we took before them. Chapters 5 and Chapter 10. Chapter 5 having the being impacting our phase 1 MS4s, and then Chapter 10 impacting our phase 2 MS4s. And so those have been approved. Now that doesn't mean they're final. They still have several steps that they go through after the board approves them. The next step after board approval is that our attorneys within our OGC at TDAC do one more evaluation of it after the board has approved it, which they are, I think they're almost done with it right now. So it's still with our attorneys in TDAC, but I'm under the impression that it's kind of getting near the end of that. Maybe I've jinxed it by saying that out loud, but it's still with our attorneys. The next step is that it goes to the AG's office for them to make sure that it passes all the constitutionality questions. And then once we get a sign off from the AG's office, and that normally takes, it takes a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. I have in the past seen it take multiple months, but right now I've been told that it usually doesn't take more than 2. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that that's the case here. Although we are sending them 3 different rule chapters at the same time, so that might take a little bit longer. But once the AG's office signs off on it, then we will file it with the Secretary of State, and then it becomes effective 90 days after we file it with the Secretary of State. So I know that we will reach out to TNSA and to folks and let you know when it does go to the Secretary of State, so you'll at least know that it's 90 days away from becoming effective. But that's kind of the timeline we're looking at. So it will be a few more months. And then once it becomes effective, then we are free to issue permits. So we are in the process of starting to look at the general permit and any changes that we might want to make, given that it's going to be expiring here shortly. And just with the rule that the board has passed, just again, trying to make sure that we can incorporate that language into the general permit and have it ready when the rules do become effective. And then we are looking at our individual permits also. We know several of those have been expired for a while, and we are working on trying to draft language that would go into the individual permits based on the rules, and we will be reaching out to our phase 1 MS4s as we're able to and to talk through issuance of those permits. And again, we can't really issue them until we have the rules become effective, which is months away, but we are going to start working on it now because we have reason to believe that they hopefully won't change very much from what the board approved. So that being said, in the next permit iteration, especially with option 2 being in the phase 2 general permit, we are looking to keep option 2 in there and as well option 1. And that's one of the things that we would really like to get some feedback on. Clearly when we have, go back up here, both individual permits and the general permit do come with public notice period. So we will clearly have a chance to get comments and information from an input from folks then, but we're also open to it now. So if you have some strong opinions about phase 1 or phase 2, sorry, option 1 or option 2 monitoring, or anything else really, we are open to hearing that now as we are contemplating and thinking about what monitoring will look like in that next permit. I will say the whole reason that we have the option 2 monitoring is because of input that we had from MS4 programs outside of a public comment period. I mean, this was just MS4 is coming up to us and saying, we really need more flexibility. And so that kind of input generated some internal conversation for us and led to us putting option 2 into the last permit cycle. So if you have really strong opinions about stuff, please do speak up and let us know, because we're not always aware of the struggles that you have on a day-to-day basis unless you share it with us. And that's the only way that we can make these permits better. Okay, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that Anne and Karina have really asked me to push that we welcome input on monitoring, not only analytical, but any of the non-analytical, such as the visual stream assessments. I don't think we can let people do nothing but stream assessments from here on out for the next 20 years. But if it's a part of a very strong program, or if it's part of a very large part of what you do for one or two permit cycles, that's important information for us to understand. So again, we welcome input on what has worked for you for monitoring and what you would like to see. All right, I think I'll leave it here. Charlene, I had one more slide that has absolutely nothing to do with option 2 in case we needed it. So I'll jump over that one and we can go back to it later if you need me to. But right now, Karina, Anne, did y'all want to add anything as far as it goes for option 2?
I guess I would like to maybe open the discussion for the folks that did not take option 2, maybe why they made that decision, because we were able to have a good meeting and discussion on with the ones that selected option 2, and I really appreciate for them taking the time and talking to us about how the option 2 worked for them, but we didn't have the same opportunity to talk with folks that have selected option 1.
Mm. So those that are on the meeting right now that chose option 1, was there something that was missing from option 2 that would be helpful, that would make it more appealing, or do you find option 1 just really helpful? And so, yeah, I mean, we'd be happy to hear some feedback on that from those that are still using option 1. Charlene, are there any comments at all?
No comments. Nothing in chat.
We need to start calling on people. We might see participation drop if we do that.
Start dropping out like hot potatoes.
Well, so I am going to call on Crystal Warren. Crystal, if you don't mind, since you're on here, do you mind kind of sharing some of your experience?
No, yeah, thanks for asking. So I believe I was pretty active going to the TNSA meetings, the quarterly meetings. So I would announce at the quarterly meetings, hey, this is an option 2 monitoring. I think it would be really beneficial for you. And I said, you know, if you're interested, let me know. And then I met with each MS4 individually. And we talked about what the benefits would be, a lot of them I had to give them ideas on what they could do, of course, because they're just not used to thinking outside the box. It was their first time to have an option, but they really liked, I think all of them in the Shelby County region focused on E. coli, because that's kind of the low hanging fruit. It was easy to get their feet wet with that, figure out what they're going to do, and then they could progress into more challenging parameters in the future. But they all were fairly excited about the idea of reducing or showing, well, all of them wanted to show that the E. coli in the streams were not them. That was their goal for everybody. It wasn't us, it's something else. And I don't know how successful all of them were, but that was their goal. So I think it was really productive. I had to meet with them at least, most of them about twice. So we would have the initial meeting, kind of discuss it, and then they would come up with a draft plan, and it didn't necessarily hit all the marks that we required in the permit. It would hit like 5 of the 7 or however many it was. And we said, well, you gotta figure out what your purpose is, and you have to define what your purpose is. I think that was the biggest hurdle, is it was challenging for them to actually put that in writing. But once we did that, like I said, I think it just took about 2 meetings, and then they got going, like Lakeland said. So Lakeland used many of the TDEC monitoring locations that are shown on the map viewer, and the map viewer shows all sampling locations ever conducted. So as was said earlier, some of those streams were dry, so they couldn't sample them, or just inconsistent waters or inconsistent flow. So I think the recon is very important just to avoid that. But I think all of them found it fairly productive and beneficial. And then I would review their annual reports and keep track of their results and say, oh, you said you were going to do this. What happened? Why didn't you do this? And they'd say, oh, this happened, you know. So I kept fairly close tabs on them as well. Just so it was a good partnership. They knew I was looking. And so I think it kind of encouraged them to stay afloat, or, you know, just keep going with their proposed plans. And some of them, it was delayed, and that was okay. If they said they were going to do 1 stream in 2018, but, you know, they lost personnel and were unable to do it, they would tell me, oh, we're going to do it in 2021. And that was fine. They could modify their plan just fine. We understood that things came up. We were flexible with it as long as they met that core objective that they said they were going to do.
2 things you said there, Crystal, that I really appreciated, and thank you for that. One of them being that one of the goals was to show that it's not the MS4 that's the cause of the pathogens, and we're okay with that. I mean, any information that helps us at TDEC recognize where the problem might be, that's helpful for us, but it's also helpful for the MS4 to be able to say, this isn't us, and to give themselves some insurance there for not having additional attention, whether it's from us or environmental groups or EPA, but to be able to say, we've done monitoring to show that we don't really have a finger in this one. And we think that's useful information to have. The other thing you said is that if they weren't able to follow the plan exactly as they had designed it, we are flexible, because I think that's an important thing for folks to understand, is this is not a gotcha thing. This is, what are your goals? How are you going to do it? But we recognize that in the process, you might find yourself with challenges that you weren't anticipating. And the whole idea is to use the monitoring to determine the most effective way to run your program. And if that has to evolve and it has to change during the course of the time, then, you know, we're happy to work with you. So, thank you, Crystal.
Sure.
I do have a chat real quick from Michael Hunt. Speaking of monitoring, anything to share, RE, the latest on PFAS, and if it might be a pollutant parameter for MS4s to consider in the future?
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily think that you're going to see it in the next couple of years for stormwater. After that, though, I just don't know. I do know that EPA is working on multiple fronts to try to address PFAS, and a lot of that deals with industry. The effluent guidelines that are specific, like OCPSF, effluent guideline, which are for NPDES permit holders that are especially industrial, well, OCPSF, industrial in nature. They, EPA is also working on monitoring programs and just developing EPA approved methodology, because right now they don't have approved EPA methods for a lot of the PFAS chemicals that are out there. So there's just a number of different areas where EPA is kind of playing catch up on this one. And a lot of the states we're finding ourselves not wanting to get ahead of EPA on it, but also at the same time trying to figure out where we think we might have contamination in the state. We, TDAC, have recently started a relatively ambitious monitoring program that's going to be statewide to look for places where we think not places that we're expecting to find contamination, but places where we know there's drinking water sources for public drinking water systems. And there's about 1,200 of those across the state, and we're going to be sampling those over the next year or two. We're hoping that will give us an idea of if we do have contaminated sources of those drinking water sources, and then help us do some more investigation there. But again, that's a process we've been working on for the last year to get the equipment and to get everything in place. And there were a number of hurdles that popped up during 2020 that has delayed our start there. But we are right now in the process of starting that sampling and hope to have it done within a year or two. But what that will translate to for MS4 permits, I just don't have a good answer for you. Again, EPA is working pretty fast and feverishly for EPA, and fast is a relative term there. Anne, Karina, have you all heard anything from EPA specific to MS4s with PFAS?
Not at this time.
Yeah, I haven't either.
No, I have not.
Okay. So, Michael, to your question, I would not be surprised if at some point we're discussing this again, but I don't think in the next year or two we're quite ready. Charlene, other questions in the comment?
The only request I had is if you could share your PowerPoint in a form that we can send out to everyone when I send out certificates. I had a request about that. Other than that, I have nothing at the moment.
Okay. So we have, it looks like a few more minutes. How long did you need at the end, Charlene, for your?
Oh, just like 2 minutes, like quick. It'll be really, really, really quick. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So I'll give it a couple more seconds. Any other questions on option 2 or really anything related to the permits?
Oh, I do have, when do you think the new draft may be available?
For phase 2?
I believe it was Cynthia Allen asking.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not even urgent. We were talking about it recently for a review through the permit and wondered about if that might be available and when.
I don't know. It's kind of difficult for us to put it out before the rule goes final or becomes effective, because we are statutorily not allowed to issue new permits until we have the rules in effect. And if we put something out there for comment before they're finalized, it might be an issue. Our attorneys probably would not be happy about that. So it might be one of those things where we are trying to have something ready to go by the time the rule becomes effective. But I don't know that we can guarantee that we would have it ready at that point in time. I think our intentions are that, in the next 6 months or so, that if there's no stumbling blocks, if everything goes smoothly, which has not been the case yet in the last 6 years with this, but if it somehow went smoothly this time, maybe in 6 months, but it would become effective, the rule would become effective and we might have a permit ready. But again, that would be maybe a little bit overly idealistic.
Oh, that's totally understandable. I just knew you guys were working on it and just curious.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I appreciate you understanding. And I'm hoping none of our permit writers are on right now because they're probably cursing my name right now.
Hey, Brown, this is Roger Fields at City of Alcorn.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do not see anything.
Okay. Well, Charlene, did you want me to talk a little bit about our nutrient task force or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
We had one last slide on here that we saved in case there was time. Back at the very beginning of 2019, we, I don't remember if it was January or February, but it was very early 2019. We had our first meeting of the Nutrient Reduction Task Force, which is a broad stakeholder group where we were trying to make sure we had people who represented agriculture, stormwater, wastewater treatment plants, industry, academia, and multiple federal and state programs or agencies to talk about what steps and what pathway do we need to go in Tennessee to deal with nutrients. One of the reasons why we started this task force was because when we started talking to other states that discharge to the Gulf of Mexico because of the Gulf hypoxic zone out there, we found that states that were really making good progress and that were able to show the progress that they were making with nutrient reductions were states that had these very broad stakeholder driven task force, whether they called it a task force or not, but they had some kind of stakeholder group that helped make decisions. And that states that were still kind of struggling were those states that did not have any kind of stakeholder input or at least no formal stakeholder group that was discussing these issues. So again, it was early 2019. And so for about a year there, this group met quarterly and we found, the ask of the group was to really think about how do we want to measure success in Tennessee and what kind of goals do we want to set for Tennessee for nutrient reduction? And we, for that year, 2019, I felt that we were making some really good progress. We had a lot of folks coming in to this meeting not understanding what the other sector's challenges were. Ag didn't understand what everybody else's challenges were. Wastewater thought that ag was doing nothing. People were fairly siloed in their understanding of nutrients in Tennessee. And so a lot of that year was spent with folks understanding what was working and where were the gaps for not only their own sectors, but all the other sectors too. And so a lot of good dialogue, some good partnerships, good discussions, and we were really just starting to get some traction. And then the pandemic hit. And so we lost a little bit of traction in 2020, but are trying to really re-engage. And a part of that re-engaging, we have recently asked our, well, you can see here on the slide, we have different work groups, goals and metrics, monitoring and data analysis, best management practices, and communication, education, and outreach. So these are our 4 main work groups. And the best management practice work group, we are looking at, as a part of our kind of reboot, we're asking that we develop 4 sector-specific, maybe sub-work groups, I guess you could call them, under the best management practice work group. And they're going to focus on what are the BMPs that we could be suggesting and encouraging right now. It's going to take us a while to figure out what goals do we want and how do we measure it, and gathering all of the data that we need for monitoring and showing improvements. It's a huge undertaking and it's not going to happen fast, but there are BMPs that can be put on the ground much faster. And so we're asking these subsectors to focus on the sector that they represent and to really talk about what are those BMPs that we know are working, and are there BMPs that we suspect work, but we don't necessarily have data, and do we need to be gathering data to show that those BMPs work? And then how do we, as a task force, encourage? What kind of support can the task force lend to these practitioners to encourage the adoption of BMPs? So again, really with those subsectors, hoping to get some on the ground movement right now while some of the larger work groups really work on some of these big problems that are just going to take a while for us to dig through and determine how we show success in Tennessee. One of the, I think, great things that we are doing is we are designing a web page. For the time being, it is on TDEC's webpage. We're hosting it right now for the task force, but we are hoping to use this webpage to share and to show folks within Tennessee, as well as external from, EPA or environmental groups, anybody that wants to figure out what's happening in Tennessee. We're hoping this can be kind of that landing spot where people can come and find links to all of the really good work for nutrient reduction that's happening for ag, for stormwater, for wastewater, for industrial. Just again, have an area where we're able to really brag about the good work that's happening, because right now there's not a place where we can show the progress that's happening in Tennessee. It's kind of scattered and spread and around in different places and not even necessarily on the web yet. So if you are aware or you have websites or have ideas of places, especially specific to stormwater, that we might want to add links to, please share that with us. I would say share it with Karina, because we're really trying to add to this website. If people go there and they see that we have tons of links for 2 or 3 of the subsectors, but not for another 1 or 2, then it looks like we're not doing anything in those areas. And so we know we're doing a lot in stormwater, and we want to brag about that. So if there's websites that we can connect to or links that you think that would be important to show the good work for nutrient reduction that's happening in Tennessee stormwater programs, please share that with us. Even if it's just an individual MS4 or TNSA or anybody else where that information could be shared, we would love to be made aware of it. So, and with that, I think, Charlene, I've only left you a couple of minutes.
Perfect. Anybody have any other questions, concerns, anything else before we get going? Thank you so much, Karina. I do have something to share on my screen really quickly. Okay. So I just want to remind everyone that we have the registration is open. Sorry, I could show myself, I guess, if I could. When I get in this mode, it's hard to see. Well, we do have registration open for the TNSA conference. We're very excited about being able to meet in person this year. I believe that our next in-person region meetings will be the first week and second week of September. So get ready for that. And we're also talking about trying to hold the Paul Davis classes maybe before the end of the year. There's a lot of other things going on in the fall, but we'll see if we can fit some of those in. So I'm very excited to announce all these things. We do not have any TNSA Talks scheduled at this time. If you're interested in hosting a TNSA Talk, please let me know. We do have some dates available. We would like to continue these going forward with TNSA for a while. So we're really excited about that. Thank you so much, Jenny, for talking today. I really, really do appreciate it. I will be sending out your PDH certificates along with Jenny's slides and any other information that you think we need to send along to you today. So that could be either this afternoon or in the morning. Does anyone have anything else? I believe I have a comment. Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you soon and have a very good afternoon.